Oh, welcome to the Gamblin Gauchos. I'm Rob Bro. He's Kyle Jacobson. He's Money Mainville. We've got a lot to go over today, including the Texas Tech Ring of Honor. Are we going to run out of wall space? People are asking. We'll talk about that today and more. We'll also cover maybe some Olympics trials. We've got some track and field trials going on currently. Red Raiders trying to make the Olympics, and just local stars trying to make the Olympics from Wayland and South Plains as well. We'll talk about those. But let's start with the Ring of Honor. 3 new entrants. First of all, Money, Kyle, how you guys doing? And what were your thoughts on the latest 3 entrants before we kind of move on to the whole idea of the Ring of Honor as a whole? Money?
I'm doing well. Ring of Honor thoughts. Don't have a lot. I thought the funniest part was the video talking about the Mahomes induction. Because didn't they lose that game against Baylor?
Yes.
Or did they win?
No, they lost.
Okay. So that was the first thing that caught my eye. Didn't even fact check it, but I was like, I think Kirby said it was like an excellent weekend of celebration. I was like,
it was, yeah.
Pretty sure we lost that game. Still a cool thing though. But yeah, other than that, a lot of the 3 were before my time. Obviously, Wes being a player that I remember growing up and watching, not at Texas Tech, but later on in the league, and then kind of got introduced to his time at Tech through family members that went to Texas Tech. So that was like kind of a cool hand-me-down. He was kind of him and Danny Amendola were like 2 of the first that I really remember picking up on, and Crabtree, obviously all the quarterbacks. But yeah, the other 2, I'm excited to learn more about. I'm sure they've come up in the rigorous top 100 research that's been going down. So yeah, excited to learn more from the best here.
Rob, before I dive into this, I'm curious your thoughts on Wes Welker's induction specifically.
Now, hold on. There's a kind of an anti-Wes Welker bit that we do that I don't know where it started.
Did?
Of course, we don't do bits, so I think we need to retire it. I'm very pro Wes Welker. I just think there have been a lot of good wide receivers to come through, and whenever you kind of have a greatest of all time conversation or any kind of conversation about great players at Texas Tech, the first name that ever comes up is Wes Welker, and I just think that's kind of funny. I do think he's one of the best to ever do it for the Red Raiders, but there's also a list of other guys that I would put maybe a little bit ahead of him as far as wide receivers go, but I do think he's a top 5 guy, and I do think he belongs in the Ring of Honor. Now, I think there's a conversation to be had as far as you didn't start this Ring of Honor until 2012. I think the pace you're going on and inducting, I think 6 since 2020 or 21 is too fast. Putting in 3 this year, I think will eventually catch up to you. But I do think you're doing some catching up to the rest of the time you've been playing football, nearly 100 years now. And there was some pushback, some conversation this week amongst the fan base that you're having too many guys in your Ring of Honor. Too many guys. Well, some very generous math says at least 3,000 people have played football at Texas Tech. Me and Kyle kind of did this math together. I was way over, but Kyle kind of talked me back on the numbers. But at least 3,000 people have played football here at Texas Tech in the 90-some-odd years. And that's less than 0.5% that you're putting in right now. So that's a pretty elite group. And I think you honored the 73 team. I think you honored the 76 team. And then you obviously honored Wes Welker for his contributions to Texas Tech football and beyond. I think Wes Welker certainly is an and beyond guy because of what he did in the NFL, how he revolutionized, along with Mike Leach, the offense. at not only the collegiate level, but the NFL level and going back to the high school level with a slot wide receiver. Did a lot of things. Jakeem Grant, Kiki QT, a bunch of the guys that came after Wes Welker certainly benefited from him revolutionizing that inside wide receiver position. So great for Wes Welker. He's going to come back. They'll play the Bills. The Dolphins will play the Bills that Thursday. So he'll be in town Saturday playing North Texas to accept and be on the field, and that'll be a special contribution to his Red Raider lore. Lyle Leong in the house. What's up, Lyle? Hicks or Filani over Welker? No, I don't think so. Not for this kind of thing. But I think whenever I push back on Wes Welker, it is like if I'm choosing an all-time roster or something, and I go somebody else over Welker, I think it's just kind of a funny bit to say that I don't like Wes Welker, but it's not true. I'm a big Wes Welker guy. So what are your thoughts, Kyle? I will say this. If we were retiring numbers, you've put in too many. But you're not retiring numbers. You're just putting them up on the wall. And I think there's a big room for history at Texas Tech because before 2012, I don't think Texas Tech did a good enough job at honoring history. But since Rodney Allison's been here and has kind of built out the Hall of Fame, built out the Ring of Honor, I think you've done a much better job at it. And again, as I've said in the South End Zone, let's get a Hall of Fame going. Let's put some busts up there for the Ring of Honor guys. Let's put some interaction down there. Let's put Mahomes on the wall and some of these guys in Tillman and Welker, and let's put them on the wall and have their attributes and their accomplishments. And let's teach people that Texas Tech football didn't start in the year 2000.
Completely agreed on your last point. I think there are a lot of great players from Spike Dykes era, certainly in the 70s and all through the Border Conference that probably went underappreciated. And some of that is probably a testament to how good Leach was in the 2000s. It kind of reset how we kind of view some guys historically and reset maybe the standard that we have for players and teams and all that. This is an honest question. Do either of you know what the criteria are for induction into the Ring of Honor, or is that under wraps and there's just a committee that talks through it and decides on some guys?
I think there certainly is a committee that talks through it and decides on some guys, but I do believe there's maybe an All-American component to get in, but I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule of thumb on who goes into the Ring of Honor because I don't think Patrick Mahomes met all the criteria, but he went and won a Super Bowl, and I think they just kind of said, let's put Patrick Mahomes in.
Yeah. I think it would be helpful and add a lot of clarity if they said these are the 5 or 10 things that we consider. Some of them are objective, like maybe you had to have been all conference, you had to have played here for 3 years, which that's not true because Crabtree was on the team for 3 years, only played for 2. But anyway, I guess what I'm getting at is this is a separate deal, obviously, but probably pretty similar in terms of Ring of Honor selection and our current countdown to kickoff was we were trying to measure greatness, which is partly subjective, but we were explicit in the criteria that we considered. And I'll read through it real quick. Stats, longevity, moments of peak greatness, awards and accolades, contribution to team success, singularity. So I think a guy like Wes Welker, other guys have 3,000 career yards and all that good stuff. Very few of them were kind of like the first guy at their position, plus the punt return records that he set. The era that they played in, because of course the numbers are way different today versus the Border Conference, and pro career. Now, I think before Patrick Mahomes got in, you could have made not only could you have made an argument for everybody in the Ring of Honor without considering their pro career, but without that as a component, those would still be like all the names that you would pick in terms of best collegiate career. And so to me, when they included Patrick Mahomes, that was kind of an implicit admission that, like, yes, we are going to consider maybe also what you did after you left here. All that to say, some of the criteria, I think like the players that they picked definitely fit into certain components of this criteria. So singularity with Wes Welker. I think there will never be another player like him in Texas Tech history. And contribution to team success. You could argue about 1954 versus 73, 76, and 2008, but in my opinion, those are the clear-cut four best teams in school history. And I think until this class, unless I'm blanking on somebody, nobody currently in the Ring of Honor represented either of those two teams from the 70s. So having Andre Tillman from that 73 team, I think is a great addition. Having Wes Welker for his singularity is a good addition, and Thomas Howard was the best defensive player on the 76 team that shared the Southwest Conference title, was maybe one game away from playing for a national championship in the Cotton Bowl. So I like all that. Now, having said that, I'm not going to single out any individual player. I think right now Graham Harrell's absence kind of speaks volumes. And you could say, well, not enough time has gone by. Well, he wrapped up his college career 8 years before Mahomes did. He wrapped up his college career at the same exact time Michael Crabtree did. Both of those guys are in the Ring of Honor. So if it was a consideration that, well, we're going to do the guys from the 30s and 50s first and then the 70s and work our way modern, great. But, Zach Thomas from the 90s wouldn't have been in the inaugural class, and Crabtree and Mahomes wouldn't have been in the last couple classes if we were going in historical order. So I get it. Graham Harrell's coaching. It's hard to find time on schedule. Okay. Patrick Mahomes is an active player in the NFL, and they found time on his schedule to induct him. So maybe that is all there is to it, was they've looked at it each of the last 2 years and kind of coordinated with Harrell and said, we want to put you in. Is there a weekend we can come celebrate? And he looks at his schedule, says no. And they just keep kicking it down the road a year. So I don't want to single out any one of these three guys as unworthy. I think, in my humble opinion, Wes Welker is the most worthy. But real quick, I'm going to tally up. This is a bit of a spoiler alert for our countdown to kickoff. I'm going to tally up their average position in the top 100 players that we put together. So it's, let me see here, 10. Oh, that was a giveaway. Oops. Doing some quick math here. Okay. They average about 27th.
Yeah.
The three of them. Now, one is right in that area. One is a lot higher. One is considerably lower. And you'll find out exactly where we have, we're not really spoiling anything here. You'll find out exactly where we think all these guys should be, which is to say, even if you want to have a big Ring of Honor with 16, 20, 30 guys in it, I think there's good arguments to be made for guys like Graham Harrell, Byron Hansford,
Lloyd Hill.
Nobody in the Southwest Conference has more receiving yards than Lloyd Hill. Bobby Cavazos. Using a lot of the same criteria that they appear to be considering, and that, I think the criteria we considered in our countdown was pretty all-encompassing. And I guess I'll wrap it up by saying this. We were very careful to say on the top 100, this is not a, if you're not on this list, you suck at football, or we don't appreciate what you did here. So part of this, I think all three of the guys they're putting in are worthy. But, if there is an order that you have to put them in, I think some other guys right now, their absence is kind of speaking louder than these guys' inclusion is. So I don't know. Like I said, I think it would just add a lot of clarity if they said, here's what we considered. And I guess they can't explicitly address why Graham Harrell is not in, or some of these other guys, but Tracy Saul, your all-time interceptions leader. Even with considering era played, Andre Tillman, when he left, was fifth, I think, in career receiving yards. So his production, of course, is not going to ever be what the air raid guys was, like Jason Morrow. Jason Morrow quite literally quadrupled what Andre Tillman did in one season, but you can't compare because offensive football is just so different. But even then, when Tillman left in the 70s, there were four guys who had more receiving yards and everything. Now, he was a tight end, not a wide receiver. That all factors in. But I don't know. It wasn't the three I was expecting. I think I was expecting probably Welker, Hansford, and Cavazos if they were trying to balance out different eras being represented. I I think, yeah, I do think it's important, though. I guess I'll backtrack on that a little bit. I do think it's important to have some guys from those 73 and 76 teams. So that's where I kind of don't have qualms, and like you can make an argument one way or the other. I think Thomas Howard very deserving. Because it would also be a little bit of a shame if our Ring of Honor was like all just quarterbacks and receivers, because that's where most of the statistical production has been. Because we have had good defensive linemen, linebackers, defensive backs. So anyway, I think like there's good arguments to be made for these guys, some other guys that aren't in yet that hopefully will be someday. But all that to say, I think it would be nice if the public were aware of the criteria they're considering, and that might offer some insight as to why a Hansford or a Harrell isn't in yet.
All right, so there's 11 guys right now in the Ring of Honor. Donnie Anderson, E.J. Holub, Dave Parks, Gabe Rivera, Zach Thomas, Crabtree, Tarbox, Mahomes, Thomas Howard, Tillman, and Welker. Let's go 10 years into the future. 15. Let's go 15 years into the future. How many guys are in the Ring of Honor? Are you putting in one every year from now on? Or are you going to start putting them in one every other? Is there a number you're trying to get to? Because I do think still you're trying to catch up on some guys because you didn't start this until 2012. But how many guys in 15 years would you want in the Ring of Honor?
I think we've had 4 11-win seasons in school history. I'd have to look at how many like consensus All-Americans or unanimous All-Americans. I think anybody who's ever earned that distinction probably warrants some pretty serious consideration. I think you have 11 conference championships. So I don't know, putting all that together, if you assume that there's a guy or two from each of those teams, plus your first-team All-Americans, maybe 25 kind of deserve consideration for now. But I think it's okay to have a cooling off period and say, like, we don't want to be a prisoner of the moment. Now, Mahomes is a special consideration. When he was inducted, he was I think that was only after one Super Bowl. It was a good pick. You know, he's now a 3-time Super Bowl MVP and like certainly warrants it if we're considering pro career. But I'd be fine to say, like, just like with the Pro Football Hall of Fame, you have to have concluded your career for at least 5 seasons. Same deal. Say like you must have completed your time as a Red Raider at least 10 years ago, so that we can get some of these guys from the 80s, 70s, and further back in. And it kind of relieves you of the possibility of potentially being prisoner of the moment on some guys. So I think maybe about 25 is right for the timeline you gave. And then after that, I would add very selectively, and because by then you've caught up on history, and like anybody that you wanted to induct from the 50s or 70s should be in. But you don't have to start adding guys from the 2020s until that 10 or 15 years passes. So I think that would be about the right number for the timeline that you set out.
Money, what do you think? 20, 25? Is there a cap? Do you care? Does it cheapen it to have 30 or 40 guys in a quote unquote Ring of Honor? Because you look at like the Dallas Cowboys, they are very selective. And the Longhorns, who you could argue have a richer history in football, I think have 6. But they retire numbers, which I think is different than just having a Ring of Honor.
And you can always build more space for names.
You just built a brand new big old wall there on the south end zone.
That's right. But I do think there's a good argument for kind of diminishing returns. Like obviously after a certain point, quantity speaks larger than the quality, and I think it kind of catches up on you. But I do think that this is an important time to kind of catch up on history, pick up some ones that you missed over the last several decades, catch up on the early 2000s, and then slow down a little bit. But I'm also not sure, like in recent history, like in my lifetime of being a Texas Tech football fan, what more catching up there is to do from like the last decade or so. I think once you go into the early 2000s, there's certainly a handful of names, but I can't see there being a lot of names from the last 10 or so years that become a part of the Ring of Honor.
Hey, Rob.
Jordan Brooks. Go ahead.
I'm actually going to revise my answer. I think, like, given what we've already seen about how they're handling the Ring of Honor, that 20 to 25 was my answer. In an ideal world, I kind of agree with Money that they would have been more selective to this point to begin with, and we wouldn't be on a trajectory toward at least 15 plus. Because I do think, like, when you're talking about a guy like Michael Crabtree, even taking off your Red Raider glasses, you can make a very credible argument he is the best player to play his position in college football.
Yeah.
And we're now getting to the point where, like, clearly we're inducting guys that might have been really good. They might have had Hall of Fame, Texas Tech Hall of Fame level careers, but they are nowhere near the best player to ever play their position at any school in college football history. Patrick Mahomes is looking like he's trending toward Tom Brady, Joe Montana status. Like, I think if he left right now, he has a credible argument for one of the top 3, certainly 4 greatest quarterbacks of all time, with Brady, Montana, and then if you want to throw like Manning in there. So there is a difference between that caliber of player, Zach Thomas, the only Pro Football Hall of Famer in your school's history, E.J. Holland, the only guy to start at 2 different positions on both sides of the ball in the Super Bowl. When you have a spectrum from guys like that to guys who, frankly, don't come anywhere close to some of those achievements in their career, I don't want to say, I forget how Money phrased it. I thought he phrased it really well, that it, like, I don't know, quality over quantity. And I don't know, you're kind of asking new inductees, well, you don't have to live up to this standard. And, there's a debate to be had on whether that's the right approach or not. Maybe you do want to include as many guys as possible, and maybe you can be overly selective and kind of not acknowledge a lot of history that you should acknowledge. But I'm revising my answer. I think with the way they're clearly behaving 10 or 15 years from now, I think 20-ish is the right number. But, like, if I were in charge, I think that inaugural class of 4, I think it was Parks, Holub, Anderson, and Thomas, maybe Rivera. Maybe it was 5 in the inaugural class.
Rivera, it was 3.
Okay.
Anderson, Holub, Parks, and then 2 years later, Gabe Rivera. 4 years later, Zach Thomas. And they didn't do another one until 2021. That was Tarbox and Crabtree.
See, and I think, like, right there, you could have probably stopped for a good long while. I think I have no objections to the Welker edition. I have no objections to the Mahomes edition, but I don't understand the rush. Again, like, that turned out to be just fine because right after you inducted him, he went back-to-back in the Super Bowl. But, like, there's no harm in waiting till Mahomes retires from the NFL to induct him, and then inducting him on the merits of his entire NFL career. So anyway, I think Tarbox, he was certainly, like, the first kind of great player in program history by all accounts. And then having guys like Anderson and Parks, Holub from the 50s and 60s, of course, great additions. Rivera, Thomas, Crabtree, I don't think you can exclude them, but, like, I don't know, unless they're trying to get to a certain number, I don't see the rush to add, 3 per year in perpetuity. I think you could be a lot more selective and keep it special. Like, hey, are they even going to induct one person this year? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
And then you allow some of these guys to get inducted alone one year and not share the spotlight with 2 other players. I mean, all of this, by the way, is kind of nitpicky. Like, it's a huge honor. It's in the name, Ring of Honor. To be inducted. So it's not like any kind of slight that you're sharing that spotlight with 2 other players or something. But I kind of wish they had maybe been a little bit more selective after the initial class, like bringing in the guys from several decades ago that no doubt should be included, and then kind of allowing a cooling off period for guys from the 90s and 2000s and so on.
Can I give you some names, rapid fire, and you say yes or no?
Yeah, is this like eventually I think they should be in or not?
Yeah, let's give that 15 years. And
Okay.
say next 15 years, yes or no. All right, so I'm gonna just start giving you some names. Let's say DeAndre Washington.
I'll say no. I think he deserves Hall of Fame, Hall of Honor, but not Ring of Honor.
Okay, Money.
My stepmom loved him, so I'm going to say yes.
First back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher since or in the 2000s.
Yeah, I think he's also one of. I'll fact check this while you read the next one, but I think he's one of 4 or 5 guys with 5,000 career yards from scrimmage.
All right. LaRaven Clark, 4-time All Big 12, All American.
This is a conditional yes. I think he can go in. I think Dan Irons needs to go in first at that position.
Okay, money.
Yes.
Kevin Curtis.
Yes. Conditional yes. Marcus Coleman needs to go in first.
Okay, well, we'll get there. Money.
No.
Too much Baylor bold there. BJ Simmons. We're into the show.
You know I love BJ Simmons, but I'm a stickler on the longevity thing. I don't know if any player who was a starter for one season, unless, we're winning a natty or something, to me it'd be a hard sell. Like, to me, you need Crabtree level over 2 seasons, or if you're not Crabtree level over 2 seasons, it needs to be 3.
I think he's a cusp guy.
Yeah, and I'll clarify. I had the number wrong. DeAndre Washington is one of 5 players with 4,500 or more career yards from scrimmage.
I think BJ Simmons. I mean, that record stood the passing yard record stood for 20 years until Bailey Zappi broke it. So I think there is something to be said there, but I think he's a cusper. Let's see. Jordan Brooks. Maybe from the Wells era. Has had a nice career.
I'll say no.
Money.
Is he second team All-American?
I believe so. I'd have to go back and look at that, but he had some honors, yes.
I'm going to lean no.
All right, Jakeem Grant, all-time leading receiver.
He's one of the closest for me in terms of like being on the bubble. Honestly, I would want to wait 10 or 15 years and judge it then and say, like, did this era of high-flying offenses continue for 2 decades after he left, or did he prove that, like, yes, there's more yards across the board in that era, but he did even more than that. I think he's the only player in Texas Tech history to throw a touchdown pass, run a touchdown, run for a touchdown, have a touchdown reception, and return a kick for a touchdown, which doesn't necessarily make you Ring of Honor worthy, but it is kind of a cool tidbit.
Monte Rager.
Probably yes.
Danny Amendola.
No.
Danny. Cliff.
This is going to sound bad. Had he never coached here, yes. But I feel like if you're judging his entire contribution to the program, those 6 years, unfortunately, if you take all that into consideration, makes his resume such that I don't know if you can put him in.
Gave you Mahomes.
True.
I would put Cliff in 15 years, especially if he gets back rolling in the NFL as a coach. Maybe gets another head coaching job and has a couple of winning seasons, maybe wins a couple of playoff games. I think you reassess there.
And had he coached here and just gone like 8-4, probably a yes.
What could have been? What could have been if he hired a Joey McGuire and said, "Here's $500,000 to up the recruiting."
Yeah, Cliff had 100 career touchdowns.
Certainly has the longevity there. All right, let's do some quick fire ones because I think these are all yeses. Hansford, you already said. Tracy Saul.
Yes.
Cavazos, Lloyd Hill,
Yep.
Marcus Coleman. I mean, I think all of those are Graham Harrell. I think all of those are shoe-ins.
I'll give a little bit of a spoiler for our countdown. So Welker was the highest ranked guy we had who isn't currently in the Ring of Honor. The next guy, actually the next four are four that you just said at the end there. A guy that you didn't mention that I think we should talk about that nobody has ever mentioned in this Ring of Honor discussion that I know of is Torian Henderson. Most career yards from scrimmage and still holds NCAA records for running back receptions. He has caught more passes than anybody in school history, not at that position, but period. And you think of all the air raid guys and how many times we threw the ball, that he owns that distinction and NCAA records and total scrimmage yards record. That, like, it's not one of those impossible to break records, but it would take an incredible 4-year career, which is just so rare now between transfer portal, going early to the draft. If we're looking 15 years down the road, we could be looking 25 years in hindsight, and nobody has broken that record. And I think it deserves a discussion.
I was just about to say, after you mentioned that record, that seems like one of those records that will never be broken. Just because of style of play, longevity. Not only do you have to play one place that throws the ball to running backs that long, you have to be in the mix, and you have to be a starter, and you have to stick around. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. All right. Any other names? Shad Williams, Daniel Charbonnet off the chat line there.
You know, Rob, you threw out a cool idea with Mike Leach that they could like name the Hall of Fame or the like a Walk of Fame after Mike Leach at the new addition to the stadium. What I think would be great for players like Daniel Charbonnet, Colby Whitlock, and many others whose careers, like when I said those two names, you probably envisioned two specific plays in the same game.
Yep.
That's like a, I don't know, Hall of Moments or like the 100 greatest moments in program history type thing. And you can honor players for their contributions to, like, okay, maybe he didn't have a career like Tracy Saul at defensive back. I think Tracy Saul had like 26 interceptions, something absurd. But he did give the fan base a memorable play that like all of us right now can replay in our heads. And it'd be a cool way to, like, with, you know, video technology now, you could like almost make it a museum and people could like scroll through them and you could put players into, I don't know if you would call it the Hall of Fame or the Hall of Honor, but kind of isolate those specific moments.
Yeah.
You know, Wes Welker punt return versus A&M, you know, stuff like that, and find a new way to honor players like that whose contributions are not only like one play, but who are best known or best remembered for one specific play.
Yeah, and if you put it down the concourse, you call it the Walk of Fame or something like that.
Yeah, and that's not bad. It's like I think Daniel Charbonnet was all Big 12. I'm not trying to say like his whole career was one play, but I think he would even agree that like that one play. If we asked him, "Hey, what was your favorite memory as a Texas Tech football player?" It's probably that. And it'd be a cool way to just like recap cool historical moments, like big fourth down stops, big touchdowns, stuff like that.
B.J. Simmons throwing 7 touchdowns against the Aggies.
Absolutely, the Cal game when you beat Cal in the Holiday Bowl. Stuff like that. For like Filani, I think Filani had 2 or 3 really long touchdowns in that game against Cal. But I think that'd be a cool way to recognize players for their various contributions.
All right. Well, you broached the subject. What about Mike Leach or Spike Dykes in the Ring of Honor?
I'll say no. And I don't know. People might think that's callous and everything, but this is a program that, since joining the Southwest Conference, doesn't have an outright conference championship. No appearances in, a current BCS New Year's Six Bowl. You, of course, made appearances in the Cotton Bowl before that was classified as New Year's Six. Didn't win any of those Cotton Bowls. I think we should have like a certain standard. Again, going back to the idea that verified, published criteria would add some clarity to this. I think that's a fair standard. It's like you have to have an outright conference championship and or a major bowl win. And there's a conversation to be had about what counts as a major bowl win before the BCS era, because I think that Texas Tech's Gator Bowls should count. You beat a ranked Auburn, ranked Tennessee in those bowl games. I think those should count as what we view as BCS New Year's Six today. So anyway, but no, I mean, I think that they both certainly check the box for longevity. Mike Leach certainly checks the box for singularity in terms of his air raid innovation to stats. But I don't know if, especially as a head coach, when compared to a player, I think for a head coach, it needs to be the team achievement, needs to be the most important criteria. And unfortunately, even the 11-win team in 2008 didn't wind up checking either of those boxes at the end of the season. So I know that makes me sound like the bad guy, and I'm like the parent saying no to their child, but I do think that should be a standard that is applied if we're going to consider coaches.
I'm going to say something crazy here. Mike Leach deserves to be put in the College Football Hall of Fame as a contributor, but I don't think he should go into the Texas Tech Ring of Honor either.
And he deserves his inclusion last year in the Texas Tech Hall of Fame. Like, I have no qualms about that at all, or maybe his Hall of Honor. I think Hall of Honor is higher than Hall of Fame, and I think that's where he and Cliff were inducted last year. No qualms about either him or Spike Dykes getting into that one. But again, I think part of what makes the Ring of Honor special is that it is an exclusive membership. And I think outright conference championship or major bowl win is a fair standard to apply to a head coach.
Agreed. Okay. Let's see. Couple of news bits here from Don Williams. In the semifinals of the 100, Courtney Lindsay from Texas Tech Track and Field and Fred Curley from South Plains finished 1-2 in the first heat of the 100-meter dash. 9.88 and 9.89. The top three run for Team USA spot coming up at 9:49 tonight, Central Time. A big chance for Courtney Lindsay to be on Team USA. And then Caleb Dean will be running Thursday, Friday, and Sunday in the 400-meter hurdles. Just ran in the national championships. So there you go. Pretty awesome. Pretty awesome that some Red Raiders and local guys are going to potentially be in the Olympics.
Can I offer up a segue to our next segment?
Yes.
We're talking Ring of Honor. You floated a name from the Matt Wells era, Jordan Brooks. Who is the player most likely on Texas Tech's current roster to someday make the Ring of Honor?
Taj.
Interesting. Taj Brooks. Yeah. I mean, you would like to see, with some foresight here, if I'm dreaming, maybe like a Will Hammond or a Micah Hudson, to say they're going to go off in the next 4 or 5 years. That would be the hope. Certainly on current production, I think Taj is probably the answer. I'm trying to think defensively.
Ben Roberts.
Ben Roberts, after 100 tackles as a freshman. But yeah, probably Tosh. Yeah.
So y'all mentioned the three names that I think have, a reasonable shot. However you want to define reasonable. Rob, you broke it down. Less than 0.5% of players make the Ring of Honor, so it's a stretch for anyone. But Taj is kind of 3/4 of the way, or 80% of the way there in some respects. Like the foundation that he's laid, one more great season. I think there's some conversations to be had. Wrote about that on Patreon. That's the main thing I want to get to here. Micah Hudson hasn't played a snap, but is allegedly, according to the people that rank these sorts of things, the number one prospect you've ever had. And so you don't necessarily need to arrive at Texas Tech with that kind of fanfare in order to have a Ring of Honor caliber career. But if he's as good as some of the comps that he's been labeled with, Michael Crabtree 2.0, Garrett Wilson, and he stays for 3 years and has, 3,500 yards and some touchdowns, and Joey's teams do win a Big 12 championship in that time span, I think it's, certainly a possibility. And then the last one, kind of a dark horse, Ben Roberts. He's only played 1 year, but that 1 year is like about as good as it gets for a freshman. Freshman All-American, led the team in tackles. And you start to wonder, okay, if he does that for 3 more seasons, who knows? Maybe he could have a resume that is worthy of some consideration. I don't know if any of those guys will turn into NFL players. I guess Micah Hudson probably has the best odds of that. But Taj Brooks on Patreon kind of put his chase for history into some context and gave you some numbers. So laid this out earlier. There's 5 players in Texas Tech history with 4,500 yards from scrimmage or more. That's Torian Henderson at 5,300, Byron Hansford at 5,000, Ricky Williams at 4,800, James Gray at 4,800, and DeAndre Washington at 4,500. So Brooks right now has 3,400. So he's 1,100 away from joining that club. And he would need 1,900 yards to pass Torian Henderson, which I think, again, very tall task, especially when you consider Torian Henderson caught 303 passes in his college career, and Taj is not featured at all in the passing game. But I think he could, very feasibly get to 5,000, and he would be only the third person at 5,000. Byron Hansford at number 2 on that list at 5,031 to be exact. I don't think that's out of the realm. In fact, if he duplicates what he did last year, 1,538, he would, let's see here, he would be just shy by 64 yards, 63 yards. So if he has last year all over again, he's number 3 in scrimmage yards. But the record that he does have a real chance at is Byron Hansford's career rushing record, which is, let me find it here. He's 1,167 yards away from that. If he plays 12 games, and I'm leaving in the possibility that we either don't make a bowl game or that he opts out of the bowl game, he would need 98 yards per game. Now, he ran for 1,500 yards last year, so I think 1,100, 1,200 certainly possible, even if he has to sit out a half or two because he's dinged up or something. He basically needs, at his career rushing average, he needs about 225 carries. He had 290 last season. I think there's also something to be said if we're 2 or 3 games away and he's sniffing that record, they're going to try to get him enough totes of the rock to get there. So I actually think it's pretty likely, if he stays healthy, that he's going to emerge as Texas Tech's all-time leading rusher. And when he does that, I think if you lead all-time in any major statistical category like that, I think a Ring of Honor conversation at least is warranted. And then we'll get into, well, he did it in 5 years. Byron Hansford did it in 3. What are y'all's thoughts on that part of on chasing history, number 1, and number 2, the fact that we're going to have to kind of judge some of these guys because they got an extra COVID year versus some of others doing it in Crabtree's case 2 years, Hansford's case 3 years?
Yeah, well, for one, Hansford did it in 732 carries, and currently Tosh has 593. Over 5 yards a carry, 5.1 for Tosh, 5.6 in a career for Byron Hansford. So I don't think it's as big of a gap. I do think some of that is, as much as we talk about receivers today catching balls and getting opportunities that receivers of yesteryear didn't have, I think running backs today have different opportunities than running backs of yesteryear. You're really leaning on Byron Hansford for 2 straight years as the guy. And you only really did that for 8 games last year for Taj Brooks, maybe. So I do think there's some opportunity here, and it wouldn't bother me at all if Taj Brooks had extra years to do it, especially if he has another 1,500 yards and beats him by 400. I mean, if he's beating him by 400 or 500 yards and has 1,700 yards this year and does that twice, I think that's pretty special, and I think that stands alone. Now, if he only has like 1,100 yards and inches him by like a half a yard or something crazy, then I think that's a little bit different. But if he blows it out of the water, he blows it out of the water, and I think you can't argue that at all, in my opinion.
Yeah, so he going back to the number of carries he would probably need to break this record at his old pace. It's 18.75 per game. 225 carries would probably get him the record. Now, mind you, I also feel like that's not a huge assumption because he didn't run for those yards last year with like the offensive line just opening a bunch of holes wide open for him. He led the nation in broken tackles, and if you look at his highlights, he's getting hit at the line of scrimmage on a lot of those and like doing it all himself. So you can be like, oh, the offensive line isn't going to be good this year. Okay, it wasn't that good last year, and he still ran for 1,500 yards. So I think, I don't know, again, if he stays healthy, a 400-yard drop-off seems unlikely. Particularly when you look at, Taj had 19 or more carries in 10 of the 13 games last year because he did play in the bowl game. The 3 exceptions were the first 2 games, Wyoming and Oregon, completely inexplicable. And then Kansas State, he had 17. And, of course, we were trying to come back, I think, from the second half of the third quarter and on, so we were going to the air. It's hard to imagine a scenario where he finishes any game next year with fewer than 15. Maybe the FCS game if he has like 14 carries in the first half and then they just park him for the second half. And honestly, he should have 20 plus in like most games, unless the game flow is just really weird. He ran for 95 or more yards in each of the final 11 games last year. So basically, as soon as they started feeding him the rock he had 7 carries versus Oregon, 11 versus Wyoming. As soon as they gave him more than that, 95 plus automatically, he had some games with certainly upwards of 100. I think 140 something was maybe his most. But here's kind of what you were alluding to, Rob. Byron Hansford carried the ball an average of 19 times per game his freshman and sophomore year at Texas Tech. Taj Brooks didn't have more than 17 carries in any single game against an FBS opponent until last year, his first senior year. Hansford averaged more than 28 carries per game his senior year. Brooks has only had 4 games with that many carries in his entire 4-year career, and he's never had more than 33 in a game, which if Hansford was averaging 28, he probably had 30 plus about half the time, and then the other half, 25 or whatever. You brought this up. Hansford toted the rock 732 times. Taj hasn't even eclipsed 600 yet. I think he will pass Hansford at total carries by the end of this. Hansford 5.6 yards per carry. Had an offensive line with an All-American left tackle. I'm sure they were playing with a fullback, tight end, lead blockers galore. Taj is doing this in an offense that was 93rd nationally in run share last year out of 130 whatever FBS teams. Now, he himself got a lot of carries, but this is not a run-first offense. He's not running out of the I formation with 2 or 3 lead blockers. The other thing I think is fair to point out is 2 of Hansford's 3 seasons were in the Southwest Conference. Not a bad conference at all, especially when Arkansas was in it. But the floor of that conference was pretty bad. You have SMU coming off the death penalty, Rice, some others that maybe weren't so great. Like TCU is far from what they are today. Versus the Big 12, the floor kind of raises. There's no – even Kansas. Kansas won 9 games last year. Taj doesn't have the luxury of playing death penalty SMU and Rice as part of that was one quarter of Hansford's conference schedule back in the day.
Yeah.
Taj doesn't get to play against any teams that bad in the conference schedule. Maybe Baylor last year. So anyway, we can have that conversation about 3 years versus 5 years. I think, though, when you consider some of the other factors, it's almost a wash, and a record is a record. So in terms of Ring of Honor, I think he's chasing a lot of things this season. I'm sure he wants to be All-American. I'm sure he's looking at Doak Walker. He could be first-team All-Conference for a second time. But he's chasing school records and could be chasing something even greater if we're talking Ring of Honor and leading all-time in your statistical category for your position as part of that criteria. So he could be a guy, if he has the kind of season that he had last year again, he could be in this very same conversation 10 or 15 years from now.
He also would join, if he rushes for more than 1279, he would be one of 3 running backs in Texas Tech history with top 10 seasons rushing-wise, with Byron Hansford, who had 2,084 and 96 and 1,374 and 95, and then James Hadnot, who rushed for 1,371 and 1,369 and 78 and 79. Currently, Byron Morris has 1,752 and 93 and 1,279 in 92, but he would knock Byron Morris off the list. So that would be another notch in the cap. If Taj Brooks rushes for more than 1,300 yards, he would surpass Byron Morris and be one of the 3 guys knocking him off and joining. I'm looking at this 96 season, Kyle. The top 10 single games from Texas Tech and Texas Tech history, rushing-wise. Number 1, Byron Hansford, 287 against Baylor in 96. Number 3, Byron Hansford, 272, 1996 against Oklahoma State. And then number 8, Byron Hansford, 247 against Southwestern Louisiana. So that was a special season there from Hansford.
Yeah, seriously.
3
that's
games.
almost 800 yards, 750 yards?
In 3 games, yeah.
Gosh, he had over 2,000 that year. So,
yeah,
it wasn't like he only had a few good games. He still did plenty in games where he wasn't running for 300 yards. But, man, that's still wild.
Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty special.
So to put a bow on that conversation, I would go in the same order y'all did. I think it's Taj 1, Hudson 2, Ben Roberts 3. And, of course, a lot of unknowns. We haven't even seen a lot of these guys play. We haven't seen Hudson play. But, yeah, I think a lot of fans realized Taj had a great season last year. And, I don't know, maybe I was just late to the party, but I don't know if they had the historical perspective or context to what he potentially set himself up to do this year. So anyway, if you want the full breakdown and maybe a little more commentary on that, it's on our Patreon, patreon.com/Gamblin Gauchos.
Would you need a Doak Walker or something to get in there, or do you think just the stats wise would benefit? Because Ollie Gordon won the Doak Walker last year.
Yeah, I think Byron Hansford, Bam Morris, and James Gray all have either a Doak Walker and or first team All-American. I could have the details mixed up on that.
I think you have 2 Doak Walkers.
Yeah, I think James Gray was not Doak Walker, but I think maybe he wasn't first team All-American. I can't remember. But yeah, I think that's a fair point, is if you've got a group of running backs that have met those criteria in their career, and Taj, even if Taj runs for 1,400 yards next year, breaks the record, is all Big 12, but isn't All-American, doesn't win the Doak Walker, it's fair. We put awards and accolades as part of our criteria for the top 100. I think that's the kind of thing the Ring of Honor committee would consider. Now, even with the Doak Walker and first team All-American, I think unanimous All-American or consensus All-American, Hansford still hasn't made it. So that's still a head scratcher for me not to beat a dead horse from 30 minutes ago. But yeah, I think that would be another notch in his belt if he was able to secure one of those like big national distinctions.
I also asked this in the Discord, but I saw this stat this week. It just kind of is right here, so I'm going to say it. Georgia has one 1,000-yard season for a wide receiver in their history. It was a guy in 2002, so it wasn't AJ Green, it wasn't Hayden's Ward, it wasn't Brock Bowers.
George Pickens,
It's no 2002. No, it wasn't George Pickens either.
Adonai Mitchell.
Nope, not Adonai Mitchell. The Red Raiders have in their top 10 guys who have had at least 1,177 yards. And I think Crabtree is number 11 with 1,132 or something. So your top 11 all has 1,100 yards. And there's been at least 3 or 4 seasons since 2000 where you've had 2,000-yard receivers on one roster. Darren Moore and Eric Ward did it. Wes Welker and I guess Danny Amendola maybe and Filani, whoever it was. But a bunch of those guys did it together.
Hey, let me find something real quick. I think it was 2003. They were like 100 yards away from having, I think, 5 or maybe 4 1,000-yard receivers.
4. It was
think-
Mickey Peters was about 50 yards away from being the 4th.
Yeah, he was. Okay, here it is.
Welker, go ahead.
In 2003, Texas Tech had 3 1,000-plus yard receivers, and Mickey Peters had 975.
Yeah.
And then Torian Henderson, the running back, had 611. So their fourth leading receiver was 975. Fifth leading receiver had 600 yards, which is I feel like 600 is a good like number 2 for most teams, and that was our number 5 in 2003.
And that was Welker, Nehemiah Glover, and Carlos Francis.
Probably that sounds right. Was Jared Hicks on that team?
No, I think he was after.
He was on that team, but he was a true freshman, so he wasn't on that list. Yeah, I think that's right. That's wild, though. Yeah, we had this conversation in the Discord. It would take more homework than I'm willing to do, but I would be willing to bet if every school in the FBS put together their single season leader for passing yards, single season leader for rushing yards, single season leader for receiving yards from a wide receiver, and single season receiving yards leader from a tight end, that our combined top 4 would have more yards than any other school's top 4. Because you've got, I think, 4 quarterbacks that have eclipsed 5,000 yards in a season. Crabtree, I think, was close to 2,000 receiving in 2007. Amaro either set the record for yards or catches for a tight end in NCAA history in a single season. And then you've got a 2,000-yard rusher in Byron Hansford. And, Rob, you said Oklahoma State would probably be close because Barry Sanders gets you a ton of the way there from that, I think, 1988 season.
Yeah.
And they've got Justin Blackman, some air raid QBs. So they would be close, but they don't really have a tight end like Amaro. I don't know. I'd just be curious if any school thinks they can match our top 4 for single season yards, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end.
So I think I did some more thinking on this. I think LSU would probably be close because they had Joe Burrow who threw for more than 5,000. And I would assume they have a running back that has 2,000.
For sure. Where I think where we might have them is wide receiver. Because they had Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson on the same team, but like, was there enough ball to go around for either of them to have a season that was comparable to 07 Crabtree? And then do they have a tight end? That's kind of the X factors. Morrow had, I don't know, 1,300 yards or something his junior year. So does any school have a tight end that did that combined with a quarterback, running back, receiver trio that can match like Simmons, Crabtree, Hansford?
What about TCU? Do you think TCU has the juice passing wise? Because they have you probably don't remember him, but LaDainian Tomlinson.
He had no Would Trevon Boykin be their best season by a quarterback?
I'm looking right here. I've got the passing yards pulled up. I'm scrolling and scrolling. Scrolling. I don't know that they have a 4,000-yard passer, Kyle.
See, I think that's where we almost underestimate how many yards our air raid guys put up. Because we're like, oh, yeah, Brandon Whedon had a lot of yards too, and he did. But like Brandon Whedon, I don't think would be top 4 single season at Texas Tech. I don't think Oklahoma State's ever had a 5,000 passer. I think we've had 4 of them. And then somebody was like, well, they have Brandon Pettigrew at tight end. And they looked up, he had like 600 career yards or something there. It's like, I mean, this doesn't hold a candle to Amaro's 2013 season. It's funny how we remember certain guys, good or bad. Anyway, if you're listening to this and you're not a Tech fan, you think you've got us beat, send us submissions. We'll do the math for you, but send us ideas or schools to check this on.
Fournette had 1953.
So he's behind Hansford.
Just behind Hansford, yeah. Oklahoma State's passing leader is 4904. I think Oklahoma State's the best answer. And we're spending too much time on this, but I'm kind of down the rabbit hole right now. So
honestly, Baylor might be kind of close. I don't know if they've had the tight end, but some of those RG3 Bryce Petty seasons, they had really good receivers. And they had some good running backs in the Bryles era too.
Yeah.
I'll do it for the Big 12 teams just for grins. But nationally, yeah, I wonder if there's anybody else that could do it. Maybe like USC. I don't know if they've ever had a passing. I know they had Liner, but that was kind of before guys started throwing for 4,500 yards routinely. Maybe by the time Lincoln is done. Or OU's had good tight ends. That's what I'm kind of thinking now. Is like, yeah.
Mark Andrews. It might be hard to find top tight end receiving as opposed to just receiving yards.
Yeah.
So Terrence Williams had 1832.
Yeah. That's got to be pretty close to Crabtree. I think Crabtree was – am I right that Crabtree had 2,000 in 2007?
He had just under 1962.
Oh, dang. Okay.
He's third ever. So you have third ever and second ever and third ever in passing.
That's crazy.
BJ and Graham. Then you have 11th with Graham Harrell, 15th with Patrick, 18th with Cliff, all over 5,000. Houston is the only other school with more than 2 seasons, and they were both Case Keenum.
Oh, Houston might have.
And then they also have David Klingler.
Yeah, they had some. Who was that coach that they had when they were running like the run and shoot in the Astrodome? They had some good statistical seasons for sure.
But they don't have a 2,000-yard rusher. It's kind of surprising.
Well, and Amaro was such a cheat code in this specific example because he basically lined up as a wide receiver on like 99% of plays.
Yeah, that's why I didn't win the Mackey.
He wasn't there to block. I think he had like 113 catches that year or something crazy like that. 106 catches, something like that.
Dude, what's crazy is if I asked you how many 90s guys were in the top 10 of receiving all time in college football, how many would you say?
How many from the 90s are in the top 10?
Yeah.
I wouldn't think hardly any, just based on the passing numbers in the next 2 decades after that.
Right? 3. That seems like a big number.
Yeah.
And 2 are the top 2.
Who are they?
Trevor Inslee, 1999 at Nevada for 2060 yards. And Troy Edwards with La Tech in 99 with 1996 yards.
Wow. So Crabtree's number 1 for a Power 5 receiver.
Yes. Up next, Devonta Smith in his Heisman Trophy season. You win the Heisman? I think so.
Yeah.
In 1856. Baylor, and then Justin Blackman and Jamar Chase. So Jamar Chase had 1780, LSU. And then Oklahoma State. I think Oklahoma State's pretty damn close because Barry Sanders has like 600 more yards. So you'd have to be close there.
Yeah, but I think you make it up with
has 1,000 more yards than Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, I think you make it right up with B.J. Simmons outdoing their quarterback by about the same amount.
Missouri. All right, let's look at Missouri real quick. Missouri's top receiver.
Money, are you loving this?
I'm just trying to think of teams. Like I thought of Miami for a second. I looked it up, and like all of their single season records are actually really bad. Like their top receiver was like 3 years ago and had like 1,100. So I don't think they're going to be anywhere close.
They put so many guys in, not just in the NFL, but in the first round of the NFL. That kind of surprises me.
Missouri not in the top 100 of wide receivers.
Well, Rob, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with our countdown, was like having the sacks record at Texas Tech is not the same as having the receiving yards record, because just like how disproportionately good you've been at each respective position. And I think that like Crabtree's the ultimate example of that. Like he's the best. He had the best season any Power 5 receiver has ever had. So even if you have like the single season sacks record, unless you were not only leading the NCAA that year, but leading everybody in the NCAA ever for single season sacks, it's just like not quite on the same level.
Yeah. I think it's fairly obvious that Texas Tech would lead here. I think if you knocked off the tight end, it'd be a closer conversation, but I still think they would lead. If you just did passing, rushing, receiving, if you just did those three, I think Texas Tech would be the best.
Yeah. Like I said, if you're listening and you think somebody might have us beat, let me know. It's interesting to ponder.
Alabama might be close. Derrick Henry, 2,200. Did not realize Bryce Young had 4,800.
Oh, yeah, that would be really close then.
Because they also have Devonta Smith at 1,800.
Yeah, right there on Crabtree's heels. I'm surprised Alabama hasn't turned out a better tight end in the Saban era.
Here, Kyle, you got a calculator out?
Yes.
Let's just do Texas Tech versus Alabama real quick.
Okay.
Here, Money, you got a calculator too?
I do.
All right, you do the Bama, and Kyle can do Texas Tech. All right, Texas Tech 5,833. Alabama would be 4,872. Those are the passing records. Rushing, Texas Tech 2,000 dead on. Alabama 2,219. And then receiving, Texas Tech 1,962. And Alabama 1,856. Who is it?
I've got 9,795.
I've got 8,947.
So we still beat them by 800 or 900.
Yeah. Thank God for B.J. Simmons.
Yeah, seriously.
If Western Kentucky has a running back, they might be close just because of that one season.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, Zappy and Stearns alone would be.
If Western Kentucky has a 2,000-yard rusher, I don't see it. Not here.
Yeah, this random stat game we're playing definitely benefits you to be better at passing than running, like the best running teams of all time.
Yeah.
Like you still can't run. Like Barry Sanders, I think, is the best that it will ever be, 2,600. Like you can't run for 4,500 yards in a season, no matter how good you are. But like passing, somebody could theoretically do 6,000. I don't know. Like that sounds insane, but in a 14-game season, if you're throwing it 50 plus times a game,
it's crazy too because, like, all the usuals, like you would say LSU, who they might be pretty close actually, but I still think you have them. LSU might be the next closest. Let me see the receiving yard numbers.
Do you want to add it up real quick?
Sure, let's do it. LSU, Joe Burrow's 5671.
Okay.
LSU rushing. Oh, I forgot Leonard Fournette was less. 1953. So that's not going to be it because they're all less. And then Jamar Chase was 1780.
Okay. Yeah, they're closer than Bama. They're at 9,400, so they're about 400 shy of Tech. They double dipped there with Burrow and Chase.
Yeah,
Had Burrow and Chase connected for 200 more yards, they would have 400 more total. That's crazy that the best receiver in the NFL wasn't the best receiver on his college team.
that is pretty crazy. I mean, I wonder how many.
That team was so freaking loaded. It's not even funny.
Yeah, unreal. That LSU Clemson game that year put a bunch of dudes in the NFL.
I don't know if they would win the argument for like most talented team ever, but they got to have like the number one resume ever. They went on the road at Texas, on the road at Bama, beat Florida and Auburn, who I think were both, I might be talking out of my butt here. I think they were both top 10 at the time. And then beat Oklahoma at a neutral site in the playoff, beat Georgia at a neutral site in the SEC championship game before that, and then beat Clemson at a neutral site for the Natty. I mean, I don't think anybody's ever gone through not just gone through a gauntlet like that, but like almost wasn't tested. Like I think they won all those games by a pretty comfortable margin.
William says Emaw. I don't think they'll have the receiving or passing. I'm scrolling here.
I think he's just talking about my hat.
Oh. Yeah, they're not going to be.
They don't have any offensive production.
Emaw! Yeah, why did you choose the hat? Did it just because it was close?
Yeah.
I don't know what's more egregious, the Yankees or the Kansas State hat.
I feel like it's probably Yankees.
I've got my Kansas State hat around here somewhere.
If you counted Johnny Manziel's total yards, they might be close because Mike Evans had a really good season. I'm sure they had a really good running back in like the 90s. Back when they were a legit, top 15, top 20 kind of squad in the mid 90s.
I don't know that Mike Evans had as good of a season as you might remember.
What was his best season? Like 1,400 yards?
Yeah, I'm scrolling. I don't know that he's in the top 100 here. How many rushing yards did Johnny have?
We'll look up Johnny's stats real quick. They had to be insane, right?
Jordan Shipley, 1,485.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. A&M doesn't have a top 100 receiver.
Okay, never mind then. I thought Mike Evans had better numbers than that.
Of course, that stops at 1,400, so he might have just right there.
Yeah. Got Manziel's loading.
A&M, I don't think, has a top running back either.
Okay, so
A&M frauds.
So Johnny passing had 3,700 when he won the Heisman, 4,100 the next year.
That was such a fraud Heisman.
But rushing, he had 1,400 rushing yards his Heisman year.
Oh, wow. But that was such a fraud Heisman class.
I mean, I don't know, 3,700 and 1,400 is pretty freaking good for a quarterback.
That is pretty good. But do you remember who he
1,400
beat?
is fourth all-time at A&M
Wow.
in
Remember who he
rushing
beat?
yards in a single season.
Yeah, he beat Manti Te'o and Colin Klein.
Yeah.
His second year, though, he only had 759 rushing yards. He had 21 rushing touchdowns. I think I remember that he was like the second player in the SEC to have 20 rushing touchdowns, like behind Herschel Walker or something like that.
That's crazy.
Dude, if it weren't for him, I don't know. That was like their first year in the SEC, and I remember thinking like they're gonna get blown out of the water over there. And then like this, freshman that nobody ever seen play just sets college football on fire. I wonder what they would have been without him.
Did we do Oklahoma State? Did we add that up?
No, do you want to?
Yeah, let's do the last one here real quick.
Okay, hit me with it.
1782 receiving,
Okay,
2628 rushing,
okay.
and 4904.
9,314.
So right behind LSU.
Yeah.
So the top three:
And-
Tech, LSU, Oklahoma State.
And again, I think if you add in the tight end,
Yep.
we're clearing them by even wider margins.
Man, I'm just looking at more Texas Tech guys. Graham Harrell's worst season is 47th all time, his 2006 season. Ahead of Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Mac Jones, Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, Landry Jones, Marcus Mariota, C.J. Stroud, Geno Smith, Kyler Murray, Chase Daniel, Nick Foles. That's pretty crazy. Davis Webb's California season's on here at 79, ahead of Heisman Robert Griffin III. Seth Dagey at 92, ahead of Geno Smith's 2012 campaign, ahead of Bryce Petty. Cody Hodges at 97. That's pretty awesome. Pretty incredible. Pretty incredible. All right. That's all I have for today. We'll have a mailbag on Wednesday. No, Taylor Potts is not on the top 100. Though I bet he's pretty close, honestly.
Had he stayed healthy, he might have been.
Yeah, or if he wasn't so good in practice or whatever, Nick might be on there. All right, we'll have a mailbag episode on Wednesday on the Patreon. If you want to follow the Patreon at patreon.com/Gamblin Gauchos. Kyle, do you want to tell us about your favorite law firm?
Yes, my favorite law firm is Barnett, Howard & Williams. Not that I have a ton of need for an attorney, at least not at the moment. God willing, that trend will continue. And they hope you never need them. But if you do, you find yourself in one of life's situations where you need an attorney, it's good to have somebody in your corner. And Barnett, Howard & Williams can deliver for you. bhwlawfirm.com if you want to learn more. They are based in Fort Worth, but handle cases all across the state of Texas. Real quick, before we sign off, another Patreon plug wrote a tidbit about Devin Cromwell, incoming defensive back in the transfer class that flew under the radar, but has some pretty interesting measurables if you want to compare him to some recent NFL combines. And then do you mind if we run through the countdown to kickoff from the past week?
Let's do it.
Let's see, who did we leave off with last time? So I think, let's do some math here. Seth Dagey, I think, was the last one we signed off with. So after him, 75 was Dakota Allen. Two-time All-Big 12. I think he benefits from the singularity category, just being on Last Chance U and the redemption story. Really good career. slash line, 249 tackles, 17.5 for loss, 4 picks, 3 fumble recoveries. And he lasted in the NFL for a little bit, so we took pro career into consideration. Number 74 is Brandon Williams, also 2-time All Big 12, 4th in school history for career sacks, 3rd in school history for single season sacks, led the Big 12 in sacks in 2008, drafted in the 4th round by the Dallas Cowboys. Number 73, we've talked about him a lot on this episode, Taj Brooks, the only current player. It's not really a spoiler alert. I was going to say spoiler alert, but who would be ahead of him on the current team? Only current guy to make our top 100 list. We've covered his resume at length this episode with hopefully much more out in front of him. Billy Joe Tolliver, number 72. Maybe a little bit forgotten about because of all these air raid quarterbacks. But before they showed up, a lot of the records that they were breaking were Billy Joe Tolliver's. When he left, he had the single game, single season, and career passing yards records. And most of those stood for a pretty good long while. Lasted in the NFL for 12 years and 2-time Southwest All Southwest Conference. 71, Shannon Woods. And right here, Rob, is where we broke into territory where, I couldn't pick the next guy. And you look at all their career resumes, you go, yeah, he's got to be higher with this. But then you look at, the next 3 guys you were planning to do right ahead of them, you're like, well, I can't move any of them down either. So I think that's going to be a theme from here on out is, you feel like you're underrating them no matter where you slot them because everybody at this point has a tremendous resume. But he was 2-time All Big 12. And his career slash line, he had more than 2,000 career rushing yards, more than 1,000 career receiving yards, more than 500 career kick return yards. We tossed that around in the Discord, how many other players have done that? And I think we came up with Reggie Bush and Christian McCaffrey. And I don't know if we named a third. So he's in pretty elite company in terms of volume of contribution to the game in 3 different phases there, passing, running, and special teams. He was actually 3rd in the Big 12 for receptions in 2006, despite not playing wide receiver. And then 70, this one, compiling it, how did this guy fall to 70? But Rodney Blackshear, 2-time All Southwest Conference, Tech's leading receiver his last 2 seasons. He leads Texas Tech in career yards per catch, over 35 receptions. Southwest Conference record holder for single game reception yards. Rob, do you remember how many catches it took him to do that?
92.
No, single game.
19.
5.
Okay, yeah. It was very low.
Yeah, it was 200.
Yeah.
60-something yards on 5 catches.
Yeah.
Good day at the office, averaging 50 yards per catch. And then, of course, we're talking about these big moments that players are remembered for. First and only player to score against Texas A&M's 12th man kickoff tradition. And then they quit doing it the next season. So he kind of broke them. Number 69, that was today.
Nice.
Adele Duckett, defensive lineman, first team All Big 12, 2nd in school history for career sacks, 2nd in single season sacks. The only player in the top 2 for both of those. Also, I didn't know this, 4 career interceptions, 2 of which he returned for a touchdown. And you look at the quarterbacks he played against in his career, he sacked Phillip Rivers, he picked off Eli Manning, and really that whole defense kind of tore up Aaron Rodgers at Cal, his last game as a Red Raider. So played some pretty elite NFL caliber quarterbacks and still compiled a really good career for himself. He's one of those guys, based on the side of the ball he played on and the position he plays, I think was so overshadowed by all the passing yards and everything that was going on at that time. But really good career as a defensive lineman for Texas Tech. So he checks in at number 69, and with both him and Blackshear, we got replies that said, "Oh, this is too low." And it's yeah, it feels that way, and we'll see what people think of the rest of the list. But we're getting to the point where everybody mentioned is going to have a really, really special career resume. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, shout out to Rodney Blackshear. That's one of my favorite interviews we've done. That's over on the
He's so funny.
Patreon.com/Gamblin Gauchos. Shout out to Quincy Wilson. He's 16 years old and ran a 44.59 in the 400 today to qualify for the Olympic trials. 16. He'll be going up against Matthew Bowling of Georgia and some other big names, Vernon Norwood, and that's pretty awesome. Quincy Williams, 16. What were you doing at 16?
I haven't heard the name Matthew Bowling in a while.
Yeah, he's still trucking.
Do you remember that clip of him? It was the senior year of high school, that 4x4 relay.
Yeah, like the whole circle of the track behind and caught up.
Yeah, I think he legitimately got the baton like a good 75 to 100 meters behind like the first place guy, and he caught him. So I need to find that video. That was one of the wildest things I've seen. Is there any Courtney Lindsay update?
Any minute now, I believe they'll be running again for the chance to go. You're in a 9.88 about an hour ago. So let's go turn on Peacock. Let me see your Peacock.
That's getting clipped.
That's Katy Perry, anybody?
That's going on No Context for sure.
I always forget about that before I start talking. Yeah, that's Katy Perry. Let me see. Is that that's probably not even top 10 Katy Perry songs.
That's a terrible song.
It's a terrible song. Yeah. She's back. She's putting out new music. Y'all see that?
I didn't know she left.
I was a
Money,
big Katy Perry guy.
you a Katy Perry guy, Money?
I wouldn't say so.
My,
If you had to pick one, what's your favorite Katy Perry song?
oh, come on, Money.
Go with like Teenage Dream. It's a classic.
That's the right answer. That's the right answer.
Dream.
Do you like the Boyce Avenue cover?
Boyce Avenue? I haven't heard of Boyce Avenue in a long time. Oh, man, they were good.
Have no idea who that is.
They did like
you might be too young for Boyce Avenue.
Yeah. Yeah, Boyce Avenue.
Is that a guy or a band? He does like YouTube covers.
Yeah. I think it might just be one guy that I'm thinking of it. A couple of guys. They did the acoustic covers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of guys there. My most watched Vine, if y'all remember Vine, I was a Viner, was me rolling across the ground to Do You Ever Feel Like a Plastic Bag? In the, what's that, Fireworks? Do you ever feel like a plastic? I was just rolling across the screen. Outside.
Vine was a trip. I don't think I was any good at Vine.
Well, I wasn't either, but that one got a couple 100 or 1,000 views, whatever it was. I was very, very low time.
Yeah.
Just having fun. Fine, man. All right, that's all I got.
All right, we're gonna do these off-season road trips eventually. Had a little bit of technical difficulty with Wazoo and Arizona State. We're behind. We'll make them up on Wednesdays. We'll do those Sunday and Wednesday, I guess, till we get caught up. But I think we're locked in again for Wazoo on Wednesday.
Allegedly.
Yeah, and then we'll have to make up Arizona State next Sunday, then probably do another Wednesday to catch back up. So anyway, those are coming, hopefully.
All right. See you guys on Peacock.
All right. Love y'all.